Look closely at the cover of the 1980 Kiss album Unmasked. You see 4 comic book superheroes: the Star Child, the Demon, the Spaceman, and the Catman. It was a visual promise to millions of fans around the globe that the greatest rock and roll machine on Earth was still fully operational, unified, and invincible. But behind the painted face of the Catman, an elaborate corporate deception was taking place. By the time that album hit record store shelves, Peter Criss, the heart and soul of the original Kiss rhythm section, was a ghost in his own band. He had not played a single drum beat on the record. Yet, his face was prominently featured on the cover. His name was printed in the official credits, and the band management was doing everything in their immense power to hide the truth from the world. If you want to know how the music industry really works when millions of dollars, endless merchandise contracts, and a carefully crafted public image are on the line, you have to look at what happened to Peter Criss between 1979 and 1980. This is the true story of the Phantom Drummer, the tragic final video shoot, the internal struggles that tore 4 brothers apart, and the massive cover-up that Kiss tried to bury. If you are fascinated by the untold realities of rock history and want to see behind the curtain of the music industry, hit that subscribe button right now to join our community, because we bring you the real stories behind the music every week without any filter. Now, let us go back to the late 70s, to the precise moments when the wheels first started to come off the unstoppable Kiss machine. To truly understand why a rock band would go to such extreme, almost theatrical lengths to fake their own lineup, you have to understand exactly what Kiss had become by the year 1978. They were no longer just 4 hungry guys from the streets of New York City playing loud rock music in sweaty clubs. They were a multinational corporate brand, a licensing juggernaut, the likes of which the music business had never seen before. They had their own Marvel comic books, famously printed with vials of their real blood mixed into the red ink. They had lunchboxes, action figures, Halloween masks, pinball machines, board games, and a disastrous television movie called Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park that they all secretly despised. The merchandising revenue was staggering, eclipsing the money they made from simply selling vinyl records. But this entire financial empire relied entirely on the unbreakable illusion of the 4 original personas. Paul Stanley was the romantic, starry-eyed star child. Gene Simmons was the demonic, fire-breathing monster. Ace Frehley was the unpredictable alien spaceman. And Peter Criss was the street-smart, feline Catman. The management, led by the visionary but demanding Bill Aucoin, knew that if you broke up the team, you risked breaking the entire merchandising empire. The fans were largely young children and teenagers who worshiped these characters not just as musicians, but as actual, living superheroes. You cannot simply fire a superhero. You cannot replace Superman without the world noticing. And that was the trap Kiss found themselves in. But behind closed doors, far away from the flashing cameras and the roaring crowds, the human beings wearing the heavy grease paint were burning out at an alarming rate. The grueling cycle of recording a studio album, touring the world with a physically exhausting stage show, and immediately returning to the studio had taken a massive toll on all of them, but perhaps none more so than Peter Criss. For Peter, the pressure of fame was compounded by severe substance abuse issues. Cocaine, painkillers, and heavy alcohol consumption had become daily crutches used to cope with the relentless schedule and the physical pain of his job. Drumming for Kiss was an athletic endeavor. Playing heavy rock music every night, wearing platform boots and a restrictive costume under blindingly hot stage lights was a recipe for physical breakdown. To make matters significantly worse, Peter suffered a terrible car accident in 1978. He was driving his silver Porsche in California when he lost control and crashed. While he miraculously survived the wreck, he sustained injuries to his hands, arms, and nose. For a professional hard rock drummer, this was a catastrophic turn of events. His physical ability to play the demanding, hard-hitting drum parts that defined the early classic Kiss sound was severely compromised. He was losing his grip strength, His timing, once the reliable backbone of anthems like Rock and Roll All Night and Detroit Rock City, was slipping badly. His stamina was fading rapidly, and his behavior behind the scenes was becoming increasingly unpredictable, paranoid, and erratic. He felt that Gene and Paul were trying to control him, while Gene and Paul felt that Peter was throwing his life and their collective career down the drain. The band and their management attempted a radical, unprecedented solution in 1978 to relieve the internal tension and give everyone a desperate break from each other. They decided that all 4 members would release solo albums on the exact same day. The idea was to allow everyone to explore their own musical tastes and get away from the claustrophobia of the band dynamic, while simultaneously keeping the Kiss brand in the spotlight. In a twist of fate that no one predicted, it was Peter Criss who already had the biggest commercial success of the 4, having sung and co-written the massive mainstream hit ballad Beth a few years earlier. This gave him a sense of independence and validation. His solo album leaned heavily into rhythm and blues, soul, and old-school rock and roll, straying far from the heavy metal thunder of Kiss. While the solo albums were a fascinating marketing stunt, they completely failed to fix the underlying fractures within the group. In fact, they only proved that the members had vastly different artistic visions. When it was finally time to reconvene and record the next official Kiss studio album, which would be titled Dynasty, the harsh reality of Peter Criss and his declining condition could no longer be ignored by anyone in the room. The recording sessions for Dynasty began in 1979 in New York, with producer Vinnie Poncia at the helm. Poncia had a keen ear for commercial pop rock and disco, which was dominating the radio at the time, and he needed a tight, disciplined, incredibly precise rhythm section to achieve the polished, radio-friendly sound the band was aiming for. When Peter sat down behind the drum kit in the studio, it became painfully obvious to everyone present that he simply could not deliver the performance required. His timing was completely off, his drum fills were sloppy and uninspired, and he fundamentally lacked the physical strength and concentration to drive the tracks forward. Poncia, realizing that millions of dollars were riding on this album, pulled Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons aside and delivered the hard, undeniable truth. He told them bluntly that if they wanted to make a hit record in 1979, Peter Criss could not be the one playing drums on it. The producer made it clear that Peter was physically and mentally incapable of cutting the tracks. This presented a terrifying, existential dilemma for Kiss. Firing Peter meant shattering the illusion of the original 4 members, just as they were trying to mount a massive, multi-million-dollar comeback tour to reclaim their throne. The lunchboxes were still selling. The action figures were still on the shelves. A public firing would cause a media frenzy and potentially alienate a massive portion of their fan base. So, they chose deception. They chose to protect the brand at the cost of their own authenticity. They quietly and secretly brought in a highly skilled, fiercely precise session drummer named Anton Fig. Fig had actually played drums on Ace Frehley's solo album the year before, and he was known for being incredibly tight, fast, and intensely professional. Under the cover of darkness, with strict non-disclosure agreements implied and extreme secrecy maintained, Anton Fig was sneaked into the recording studio to lay down the drum tracks for Dynasty. It was a bizarre situation. The man whose face was going to be plastered on the billboards was sitting on the sidelines, while a complete stranger played his instruments. Peter Criss was allowed to play drums on only one single song during these entire sessions, a track he wrote and sang lead vocals on called Dirty Livin'. For the rest of the album, every thundering tom roll, every crisp snare hit, and every cymbal crash you hear belongs entirely to Anton Fig. But when Dynasty was eventually released to the public, Peter Criss' face was right there on the cover, looking stoic and cool. There was absolutely no mention of Anton Fig anywhere in the official liner notes. The entire world, the press, the fans, and the critics bought the record believing the Catman was still in the driver's seat, powering the Kiss machine into a new decade. The lie had been successfully planted. However, the real nightmare began when the band had to take the Dynasty album out on the road. You can hide a drummer in a recording studio, but you absolutely cannot hide him on a concert stage in front of 20,000 screaming people. The 1979 Dynasty tour, often remembered by fans for its extravagant, colorful stage production, massive laser light show, and the infamous flying stunts, was an absolute musical and personal disaster behind the scenes. Peter live performances were wildly inconsistent and often deeply embarrassing for the rest of the band. On some nights, completely clouded by substances and exhaustion, he would play songs entirely at the wrong tempo, dragging the fast-paced rock anthems down to a miserable crawl. On other nights, he would simply stop playing midway through a song, dropping his sticks and leaving the rest of the band stranded on stage, desperately trying to keep the song alive while staring in horror at the drum riser. Paul Stanley would frequently have to turn around and glaringly conduct Peter, shouting counts and waving his arms just to get him back on the beat. The relationship between Peter and the rest of the band, particularly Gene and Paul, deteriorated into open, venomous hostility. They were traveling in separate vehicles, staying on completely separate floors of luxury hotels to avoid running into each other, and barely speaking a word outside of their contractual obligations. Peter felt deeply marginalized, paranoid, and disrespected, knowing fully well he had been replaced in the studio and feeling like a hired hand in the band he helped create. Meanwhile, Gene and Paul felt they were carrying dead weight, watching a man destroy himself while simultaneously threatening to destroy their entire life work and financial security. The tour limped to a miserable conclusion, and by the final show, the silent consensus was reached. The dynamic was completely broken. The original Kiss was dead. By the time 1980 rolled around, the decision was essentially finalized internally. Peter Criss could no longer function as a recording or touring member of Kiss, but the corporate machine never stops. The band had strict contractual obligations with Casablanca Records, including the mandatory delivery of another studio album in 1980. This album would become Unmasked. If Dynasty was the beginning of the deception, Unmasked was the absolute undeniable peak of the lie. It is the most deceptive album in the entire Kiss discography. When the recording sessions for Unmasked began at the record plant in New York, Peter Criss was not even invited to the studio. He was completely shut out of the creative process. He did not write a song, he did not sing a background vocal, and he certainly did not touch a drumstick. Once again, the band called upon their secret weapon, Anton Fig, to handle absolutely all the drum duties. Anton played every single drum fill, every hi-hat groove, and every beat on the entire album. Peter's contribution to the music on Unmasked was exactly 0.0%. Yet, the management and the record label kept the promotional machine turning as if nothing had changed. The album cover was commissioned and illustrated, featuring a comic strip-style drawing that showed the band members supposedly being tracked down by a reporter and taking off their makeup, only to reveal the exact same painted faces underneath. The irony of the title Unmasked was staggering, considering it was the most heavily masked and fabricated project they had ever produced. On that comic book cover, Peter's face was right there, front and center, winking at the audience. The press releases went out to magazines around the world, the promotional photos were taken in full costume, and the fans were sold the exact same carefully constructed narrative. The Catman was still a superhero, still part of the impenetrable four-man army. The breaking point, and undoubtedly the most heartbreaking and surreal moment of this entire saga, occurred in the summer of 1980. Kiss needed to film a promotional music video for the lead single from Unmasked, a soft pop rock track called Shandi. The management knew they had to maintain the facade just a little bit longer before they could figure out how to safely announce Peter's departure without crashing the stock value of the band. In a move that feels unbelievably cruel in hindsight, they asked Peter to show up for the video shoot, knowing full well that his time in the band was completely over, knowing that his bags were essentially packed, and knowing that he had not played a single solitary note on the song they were filming. Peter actually agreed to do it. The filming of the Shandi video remains one of the most tragic and bizarre documents in rock history. You can go online and watch that video today. You will see Peter Criss in his full, magnificent silver and black studded costume, wearing the iconic, intricate cat makeup that took hours to apply. He is sitting behind a massive, shining drum kit, twirling his drumsticks with practiced flair, smiling broadly for the cameras, and perfectly miming to a drum track that was recorded by Anton Fig. He is literally pretending to be a member of a band that had already fired him. For hours on end, baking under the hot studio lights, the 4 original members went through the agonizing motions. They acted like brothers. They acted like the unbeatable rock gods the world desperately wanted them to be, all while knowing it was a complete and utter funeral for their youth and their friendship. According to those present on the set that day, the atmosphere when the cameras stopped rolling was heavy, tense, and deeply uncomfortable. When the director finally called a wrap on the final take, the overwhelming reality of the situation crashed down on everyone in the room. Peter stood up from the drum kit, quietly walked off the soundstage, and went directly into his private dressing room. He sat down in front of the mirror, looking at the Catman reflection one last time, and began to weep. Paul Stanley followed him into the room, and the 2 men, who had starved together in New York alleys and eventually conquered the entire globe together, shared a quiet, deeply emotional moment. They hugged and they cried. They both knew this was the absolute end of the road. After that day in the dressing room, Peter Criss washed off the makeup, walked out the door, and the 4 original members of Kiss would not be in the same room together again for nearly 16 years. The corporate cover-up could only last for so long before the truth had to be managed. Shortly after the Shandi video shoot, Kiss officially announced to the press that Peter Criss was leaving the band to pursue a solo career. Even this press release was a carefully worded, meticulously crafted piece of public relations fiction, designed by lawyers and managers to minimize the financial damage to the brand. They framed it as a mutual, creative decision rather than the tragic result of addiction, physical decline, and bitter internal conflict. Behind the scenes, panic had set in. The band had a massive European tour looming on the horizon, and they had absolutely no drummer. They immediately held secret, high-pressure auditions to find a replacement. After seeing dozens of candidates, they discovered an unknown, incredibly talented, and humble drummer named Paul Caravello from Brooklyn. They brought him into the fold and quickly transformed him into Eric Carr, adopting a brand new Fox persona and designing a new makeup design to avoid the backlash of simply replacing the Catman with a fake Catman. Eric Carr was an absolute powerhouse of a drummer who brought a heavy, thunderous, metallic energy back to the band, essentially saving Kiss from total collapse as they transitioned into the highly competitive, challenging landscape of the 1980s heavy metal scene. Looking back at the 1979 and 1980 cover-up, it stands as a monumental testament to the brutal, unforgiving reality of the music business. The fans, the critics, and the media were completely and utterly fooled. In an era before the internet, before social media, before instant leaks, cell phone cameras, and backstage rumors could spread globally in a matter of seconds, a massive corporation like Kiss could simply manipulate reality to protect their bottom line. They sold millions of records, completely sold out arenas around the world, and pushed endless amounts of merchandise based entirely on a ghost. Peter Criss was a casualty of unprecedented fame, the crushing weight of addiction, and the relentless, unforgiving pressure of maintaining an impossible, superhuman image for the public. The smiling Catman that fans saw on the Unmasked cover was nothing more than ink, paper, and wishful thinking. The real man behind the makeup was hidden away from the world, broken, exhausted, and pushed to the absolute brink, while a hired gun session drummer played his parts, and the corporate machine moved on without him, barely skipping a beat. It is a stark reminder that the glamorous, larger-than-life images we see on our screens and album covers are often carefully constructed shields designed to hide the very real, very human tragedies unfolding backstage. Thank you for taking the time to explore this deeply hidden, tragic chapter of rock and roll history with us today. The story of Peter Criss and the Unmasked Deception is a perfect, chilling example of how the polished, perfect image presented to the public almost never reflects the chaotic, messy, and painful truth behind the scenes. If you want to uncover more secrets, more lies, and more incredible, meticulously researched true stories from the vast history of music, do not forget to hit that subscribe button right now and join our growing community of music detectives. We are dedicated to tearing down the myths and bringing you the factual history of the bands you love. Leave a comment below telling us what you think about the Shandi music video, now that you know the heartbreaking, surreal truth behind what was actually happening on that soundstage. Did you ever suspect that Peter wasn't playing on those albums? Or were you completely fooled by the Kiss marketing machine, just like the rest of the world? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, keep listening closely, keep questioning what you see, and remember that the truth is almost always hiding just beneath the music.